So ladies and gentlemen, if you're out in the hallway, I ask please come into the conference room. So again, ladies and gentlemen, if you're in the hallway, please come on in, take your seats, and we'll get going here in a minute. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Hope you enjoyed the lunch and the guest speakers. Now we are starting our afternoon session with the first panel, and the first panel is called Korea Defense Veterans Carrying on the Legacy of Korean War Veterans. So the purpose of this panel is to connect the great sacrifices and contributions of Korean War veterans with the torch that was passed to Korea defense veterans for over 70 years. So I'm going to introduce the moderator, and then he'll introduce our panel. So Colonel David Maxwell is the Vice President of the Center for Asia Pacific Strategy. He is also a Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a Senior Fellow at the Global Peace Foundation. He is a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Army, retiring as a Special Forces Colonel. He served in the United Nations Command, Combined Forces Command, and U.S. Forces Korea. Following retirement, he served as the Associate Director of the Security Studies Program at Georgetown University. He is a graduate of the School of Advanced Military Studies, or SAMS, and he has an MS in National Security Studies from the National War College. So David Maxwell, let's welcome him, ladies and gentlemen, and he'll introduce the panelists.
Thank you, Steve, and it's great to be here, and good afternoon. General, thank you for hosting us, General, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So as Steve said, we're connecting the legacy of real heroes, Korean and American heroes here with service up to the present. And General Shin mentioned in his remarks, it's often said that Korea is the forgotten war, but it really should be and is the remembered victory. And I think we see that victory here both in our relationships, personal relationships, but also in the economic relationships. And that's really, I think, why it's so important to have this event here in Georgia, because as I know from your last couple days visiting Korean industry that's here in Georgia, and the great Korean American population that is here. So the remembered victory is I think the correct term that we should remember. Also, though, unfortunately, if there is war again, if it does resume in Korea, that there are still lessons to be learned from 1950 to 53. And, because the geography is still the same, the weather will be the same, and the fighting will be the same. Even though we have more modern technology and equipment, this will, if war does break out, it will be the worst thing that we have seen since 1950 to 53 for the United States and for Korea. And so we really do need to learn from those who have served. I just got back from Korea, and on Wednesday I was at the Korean War Memorial. And we, of course, went to the Chosun exhibit and listened to the docent explain what took place. One of the many things that I learned, always learn new things every time you go to a museum and a memorial like that. But one of the things I learned for the first time is about the weather patterns in Korea. And we know how cold it was in fighting in Chosun. but it was apparently colder than normal. It's always cold, but there are weather patterns that make it some years colder than others. And I guess at this time, it was really the coldest that it had been in many years. And so for Norman Board and for John Lee, they fought through those hard times, harsh times, and we are grateful for their service. So what I'm going to try to do today is to ask some questions of all of our panel members here, and to try to draw out some lessons, and also draw out their experiences, their feelings, not only from the war, but after the war, and then service in Korea, beyond the war, and service to our nations, to both our nations. So first, I'll introduce Norman Board, who's a Marine, who landed at Wonsan and fought the Chosin fight. He is one of the chosen few, and his service, is I think when you read our history, it is unimaginable. And now we have a person here who lived that, and we can hear from him. Like all veterans, Korean and American, after his service, he went on to do great things in the business community, and really continued to serve in his own way. And so, school at Virginia Tech, Westinghouse, and then, of course, got his MBA at George Washington. And then, of course, consulting, and he retired in 1975. And I think it's fitting that he was chosen as the president of the Raymond C. Davis chapter of the Korean War Veterans of Atlanta, and he is still holding that office to this day. So I don't know, who was the dictator earlier that we heard? We had Sonny was a dictator. So I guess he has held that office for quite some time. And so I'm going to introduce everybody right now, and then I'm going to start with questions to you. So John Lee served also during this time. He was a student when the war broke out at the Korea University, and I'm going to ask you about how you came to know English so well to serve as an interpreter, and joining the Army and then being assigned as a ROK Army soldier to the 1st Marine Division. And he has truly fought from Pusan to Panmunjom, General Peck's, the title of General Peck Sun Yip's book. I mean, he fought at the Pusan perimeter, landed at Incheon, participated in the recapturing of Seoul, and then Wonsan and Chosin. And then both he and Norman Board, I think participated in the miracle at Hangnam when the evacuation from the Chosin Reservoir there. So after his service, he, of course, came to the United States and earned his law degree at Yale and practiced law for many years, and he continues to serve as an advisor, advising military forces, and of course he is the founder and director of the Chosin Few, and of course he's also written a book as well. So we are fortunate to have his perspective and that he put down his experiences on paper for us. Next we have Major General Pat Donahue, who you don't have his biography because he is pitch hitting here. It came at the last minute, so we're really thankful for having him here with us to be able to do this. General Donahue is a tanker, served in the 2nd Tank at Camp Casey, and also the Deputy Commanding General of 8th Army, and has multiple assignments in the armor, as well as at the Battle Command Training Program and the National Training Center. He's had, I think, all the hard jobs, and so he has experience from the tactical level in Korea to the theater command and the 8th Army level. So he's going to bring us some tremendous insights there. Lastly, we have Seho Lee, who is the grandson of, his grandfather fought in the Korean War, also in the Vietnam War. His father was also an officer in the Korean Army. He's now a manager at McClarty Associates, and he works on Northeast Asia and trade issues. So I think his connection here with, I'm not sure if you work on Korea, Georgia trade issues, but I think Georgia is one of the focal points for trade with Northeast Asia. Graduate of SAIS, Johns Hopkins, and has written extensively, and so I always encourage everyone to write, and so he is an exemplar writing for multiple publications, offering his expertise, and then he served in a number of areas with in trade negotiations and working on major trade issues. He's a graduate, bachelor's and master's from the Fletcher School at Tufts. And what I think is also important to emphasize is his time in the military, in the Iraq military, included service in Lebanon as part of the peacekeeping force there. And I think it's often overlooked how much the Korean Army to this day, the Korean military, serves overseas, from East Timor to Morocco to Lebanon, as well as Iraq and Afghanistan. In the Horn of Africa, the Iraq Navy is performing magnificently, conducting anti-piracy operations. So, as President Yoon said, Korea is a global pivotal state, and from a military perspective, the military is contributing around the world. And so Seho Lee's experience is one example of that. So with that, I would like to begin by asking some questions. And for Mr. Board, I think, if we could start out, if you can recall, what were your first thoughts about Korea when you arrived? And you had been activated, your unit, Reserve Engineer Unit, activated and deployed to Korea. I don't think you'd ever been there before. No. So did you experience any kind of culture shock? And what are your most significant early memories of arriving in Korea and what you experienced?
I'd like to begin by just thanking Sonny Parks and Kevin for bringing me here. I arrived in Korea in November the 2nd of 1950, and it was a shock. Mostly it was a shock because when they unloaded my sea bag, the 1st Marine Division was set up along the coast in Wonsan, and all of a sudden a young Marine came out with his rifle and started shooting at ducks. And we didn't have a stockade, but they built a stockade and put him in it. Now, why do I tell you that? Because he was serving his tour as KP, and they immediately put me on his place, which I spent 2 weeks going and getting water for coffee. My job was to make coffee every morning, and we made coffee by taking a 55-gallon barrel, filling it full of water, and then putting C3 underneath it, bringing the water to a boil, and putting the coffee in it. So it was quite an experience for me. I was assigned to the most famous Marine of them all, Chesty Puller. Chiller had won every medal. He won more Legion of Merit than anybody in history. Terrific individual. The things that I really remember was the night of November the 27th, and that's when the Chinese attacked us. And for a young kid just out of high school 5 months ago, it was an experience that never goes away. He will never forget. When I joined the Marines had come to my high school, and they put on a program telling how great it would be to join the Marine Reserve because they had I built a new armory. But I had another motivation. If for every meeting you attended, you got paid $2.50. And so that was sort of the motivation that did it. After the frozen north, the frozen chosen, as it said, we all got evacuated. And as some of us will remember, they had blown a bridge, and I always thought I'd get out. I prayed one night I had called along with two other guys that I don't remember, under a truck to get heat from the manifold. It was only about 22, 25 degrees below zero. And they couldn't turn the motors completely off, but they could turn them off about 1 hour and then turn them back on. And so was getting some heat from the manifold. I prayed to God that if you ever let me out of here, I promise you I will never live where they don't have palm trees. So eventually on the way out, most of the Marines were evacuated December the 10th, 11th, and 12th. But there was a small group, a squad, my squad. We had a sergeant who was an explosive expert. So we got picked because General Allman, MacArthur's henchman, had flown over a supply dump in a Piper Cub and said that it had to be destroyed, or don't the Chinese are going to get a lot of good stuff. So we were told to draw rations, sea rations for 2 days, and they put 10 of us on a 6-by and took us with supplies, just two days of sea ration, but enough explosives to blow up half the world, I think. And we went up and destroyed everything in that dump. And what was there was absolutely amazing. But like all types of sport equipment, even dress blues were there. Anyway, at the end of the second day, they didn't show. So the next morning, our sergeant decided we would walk out. And that was about 35 miles that we had to walk out. Lots of things happen that. First of all, by the third day, you're out of food. And have you ever been without food? Yeah. And not knowing where in the heck you're going to get it? Well, along about the fourth day, one morning, we saw smoke coming out of a house, surrounded the house, and broke into it, and there was two older ladies in there with 3 little kids, about 3, 5, and 7. And they had a bag of rice, still had about that much in it. And we took it. She screamed and hollered, and it's always been one of the regrets I had. Maybe we could have done something else, but I don't know what it would have done. But we took their rice, and you look back on it, and you say, how could you have done that? Anyway, when we made it back to Hungnam, actually to Ham Hung, which was about 10 miles inland, and everybody was gone. All the Marines were gone. The Army was still there, but if we'd have been 2 days later, we would have been left in North Korea. So I got evacuated from North Korea on December the 21st on the Japanese LST. It had already picked up all of the refugees from North Korea that it could hold. There was no place for us to sleep. We were down in the tank deck, and you could pick wherever you wanted to, but also there was water on the floor. I picked a fuel generator, which is shaped like this, and you had to tie yourself on it at night. Landed down in Busan. We thought we were going to Japan, but we landed down in Busan, right next to the General Nelson H. Walker, which was an Army transport. And our sergeant went aboard and convinced the captain to let us come aboard, take a bath, and sleep. The next morning, we looked out, and there was a Western Union office right in front of us. We went to the Western Union office, but somebody had come up with the idea. Our parents thought we were dead. It would be nice to send a telegram home. We went into it, but they would not let us send one because we didn't have any money. So our sergeant decided we would take care of that tonight. So we broke into the warehouse and stole two things that were heavily valuable: soap and charms. Now, charms were like lifesavers, but they were square. So we stole enough of those to sell on the market, and we did get enough money to send a telegram home. And that telegram, when it arrived at my house, scared the hell out of everybody. My mother screamed and cried because the way telegrams were delivered in those days was by a young man in uniform, high boots, and when she saw him, she expected the worst. But it was a telegram, which I still have, wishing him a Merry Christmas, and I am fit and well. That's all it said. But after that, the Marines started. We sort of laid around for a few days, and then, of course, they immediately started training again. And we had one of the guys that was in our tent who got drunk with 2 or 3 other guys, stole the fire truck, and went into Mason. We were just outside Tucson, about 40 miles, and had them loaded up with all the money they had there. He disappeared and never did know what happened, but I still remember his name. So if you want to do something famous, people will remember your name. His name was Yeager. Never knew what happened to it. Don't know whether he got caught or not. On the way out, the morning of about the 4th or 5th morning, we were walking along the railroad tracks, and it took a right turn along beside the creek of the road. And there, standing in front of us at about 6 o'clock in the morning, was some 40 or 50 Chinese. They saw us, we saw them. They never made any move to raise their rifle towards us. They all seemed to be smoking. But the sergeant said, "Don't turn around, just back up, back up." So we backed up, ran like hell up, across the road, down the road, and down the side. But I was very, very blessed in 2 episodes there. And I've often thought, I hope God has forgiven me by taking the ladies and the kids' rice. Korea was a terrific experience for me. It was so cold, and it's hard to imagine how cold it was. I ended up with 2 toes on my right foot, which a medic took a look at it at a MASH unit and said they got to come off, but they didn't take them off. And another doctor said, "No, let's see what we can do." So I still have my toes. But can you imagine, if you've never been in 20, 25, 30 degrees below zero, you have no idea what it's like. Most of the equipment won't work, the rifle won't work. Fortunately, the M won't work. Carbines, in trouble. Some of the submachine guns were in trouble. But we got credit for killing, my company got credit for killing 325 Chinese that night. Some of them came at us without any rifles. They were supposed to, we later learned, pick up the rifle from the dead ones that we had killed. You didn't dig foxholes, because it's the way you could get a pick or an entrenching tool into the ice. So, and every once in a while you may have read this. So we used dead Chinese as sandbags. And when it was all over, I often thought the Marines lost a little over 3,000 men killed in the Chosin Reservoir. And you never forget that. I had 5 of my high school buddies who joined the Marines too, all killed, sometime during the Korean War. And you never forget it. Korea has been enlightening to me. It has been an amazing what that country has accomplished. And I say that if anybody takes a look at where they were, I tell one quick story. Sometime during the June, July of 1951, I'm sorry. Of course, the Chinese had another big offensive. They had two main offensives in the April, May of 51. And they retook Seoul. We retook Seoul back again. There wasn't much left of it. Unfortunately, I don't remember who they were, but the two other Marines and I got a chance to tour Seoul. You couldn't find two bricks to put together. It was so bad. Never saw anything in World War II to compare with the way Seoul was torn up. And as we were walking along, there was a Jeep sitting at the corner. And we walked by it, and somebody turned, "Hey, let's take a ride in the Jeep." So we got in the Jeep, because all you had to do was turn the switch, and off we went. And we went about, I guess, 8-10 blocks around, and we realized then we had a flag flying on the front of the Jeep. And so we stopped and realized that in another 15 minutes, every MP in Korea would be looking for us. So we ditched it and got out and got away from it. The Marines have been absolutely good to me. Even with what I went through, I still am faithful, sympathize to all of you Marines that are here, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. I think you have just illustrated everything about military service, tremendous suffering, fighting, but also the human element and even the humor in the hard times. And so you really, we talk in the modern time of the human domain with all our domains, but you have just, I think, really described the human element of war. So thank you for that. And I'm going to come back to you with some more questions later, but I'd like to turn to Mr. Lee. And could you first describe how you went from Korea University, the war started, and you went to the ROK military, and how did you end up with the Marines at Chosun?
Well, I was a student in Seoul when Korean War started. Then on July 25, 1950, when North Korea invaded Seoul, I decided to run from the Seoul. I swam across the Han River and joined and fled all the way to Daegu, and then joined the Korean Army. Korean Army needed someone who spoke English, so they gave me a rank of first lieutenant, then assigned me to 1st Marine Brigade, which just landed, and I have to join the Marine from that on, and fought in the Busan perimeter. I learned English in school, but I also attended a Bible school taught by American missionary. So I spoke very good, decent English. But when I went to the Marine, the company commander was telling the troops how to go to Jindongni, which near Masan. And I just could not understand. He was just in the cursing. And
You had to learn a whole new vocabulary.
That's but I come to know the Marine language gradually, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time with the Marine. And at the end of the war, I left the Korean Army and came to U.S. and then went to school and became a lawyer. Thank you.
Thank you. But can you talk a little bit about the landing at Wonsan, or I mean landing at Incheon and then fighting in Chosun? And you wrote such a book about it. Can you share some?
Well, Incheon landing, I have a quite different view from official views, such as the General MacArthur. By the way, I was assigned to G2 at the Incheon landing. I was in the same ship, the Mackenzie ship, where General MacArthur was headquartered. We were very lucky at the Incheon landing because the North Korean sent their main troops to Busan perimeter, and Incheon was not covered. So you have a Navy and the Marine. They had a big experience, Second World War. They know how to land it. So I thought it's not on a chance. It's really, they know how to do it. I think as far as the Navy and the Marine concerned, they had a complete confidence to capture Incheon. And their experience, their capacity prove it. But many things, in my view, we were also lucky. Soviet advisors has left Incheon before Incheon landing because they don't want to be captured by U.S. forces because each battalion of North Korea had Soviet advisors. They were not only advising strategy, but also weapons technologies. And in Incheon, the Soviet Union sent all the artilleries to Incheon in the Liberty Hill. Liberty Hill was just completely empty. But all the Soviet artilleries and ammunitions were all packed and written in Russian language, and Soviet advisors left. And if they had set up the artilleries at the Liberty Hill, they could able to hit U.S. ships, which are so-called the sea lane near the Incheon, within the artillery range. I thought we were really lucky because the North Korean were not able to use all these Soviet newly supplied artillery pieces, and so on. And there are many other things. If you tell me to write about it, I'll be glad to talk because it's not official versions. I think when the 10th Corps and MacArthur's came to the Liberty Hall near behind the harbor, the 10th Corps and MacArthur just took them all because they don't want to hide the risk the MacArthur would have had with those Soviet artillery pieces. And in my view, we are really lucky because Soviet advisors left before the landing, about a few days before landing. And then nobody were able to set up all the artillery pieces. And that's how we were lucky. And many other things. Sometime I wish that I can write my observation at what happened there.
Yeah, that would be really fascinating because, I'd love to pull on that thread and talk about it. Was the operation compromised? Did the Russians, the Soviets know Incheon was gonna happen and they left and didn't help the North Koreans? That's fascinating. But I'd like to ask you about Chosun and what do you remember most about that? What do you really want to share about the fighting at Chosun with the Marines?
I was completely in touch with Chinese and, of course, also North Korean civilians, almost 100,000 of them. They helped us greatly. I was in Hagaru, and the Chinese, they're not well trained. They did not have good weapons, and their spirits was very low. We had, at Hagaru, we had about 300 Chinese prisoners, and they were very docile. They have no the sort of spirits to fight. And but we were also lucky because Chinese wanted to capture Hagaru. That's the headquarters for Marine Division. On 27 November, that's the day when entire Chinese troops were ordered to attack the U.S. troops. Chinese was not able to cross the mountain south of south of Hagaru because it's too high, too cold, and they delayed one day. So we then prepared on 28, 27, a complete preparation against the Chinese. Whereas in the case of the U.S. Army, in the 38th Regiment of U.S. Army, they were attacked on 27th night. And they were not prepared. They did not know anything about Chinese coming in. So they were really bad shape. But we were able to defend the Hagaru, and then of course our two infantry regiment, 7th and 5th, were able to. They were good fighting the organization and able to join us at the Hagaru, and then we were, I think we could have gone all the way to Manchuria with the two regiments of Marine and the Air Force and supporting us. But we were ordered by General MacArthur's headquarters on 29th of November to retreat, and that's how we came out. But on the way, we were attacked really severely. One instance, maybe that I really admire. We were attacked in the nighttime, coming down south from Hagaru to Kotori. We are just flat land on the road, and the Chinese were both sides of the hill and attacking us. And we had a truck in the front. I was in the back of a truck. We had ammunition and wounded in the truck. Chinese are taking us. Nobody were able to climb the truck and push the wounded over the vehicle and distribute the ammunition. But there's one guy, when bullet was flying like a rain, went up, the Sergeant Macron, and he was killed instantly. In my life, I had a lawyer and I met many smart people in the world, but I don't think anyone who is more patriotic than Sergeant Macron. I still admire him. Thank you.
Thank you. Really, General, I'm going to skip over you because I want to go to Seoli to.
Please do after that.
I want to go to Seho and ask if, what stories would you like to relay from, that you heard from your grandfather and in his experiences?
Sure. Thank you, Colonel. And it's good to be back in Georgia. So Georgia is actually my first state. When I arrived from Korea to the United States, my dad was assigned here as a liaison officer in year 2000. So it's really good to be back. I was almost born in Georgia in a way because I think my dad was receiving OAC training in Fort Benning or Fort Moore in 1987, but he didn't take my mom. So he was here by himself. So I was just raised in Georgia in a way, but not born and raised. And to just go back to story about the Korean War and the stories I heard. So my grandfather, similar to Mr. Lee, was a college student. He was 19, about to become 20 when the Korean War broke out. And in July 1950, I heard that he joined student voluntary force. And at the time, of course, being college students was considered very special, and it's very rare to see anyone who attending college, especially in Korea. And he was a mathematics education major, aspiring to be a high school teacher. But that dream never came to be true. But knowing that he was a mathematics major, I think obviously they assigned him to be an artillery officer. And one thing that's really striking about him joining the military is that, and we just talked about how in 1951, there was a big offensive by, Chinese volunteer force, reclaiming Korea and everything. But at the same time, the U.S. military, especially I heard that General Van Fleet, who really had this vision to train these basic officers who just joined the Korean military. At the beginning of the war, there are a lot of second lieutenant, first lieutenant, as same goes for cadet, who lost their lives. So in a way, a lot of people can see the reason as to, you don't necessarily have to train them well. But thanks to General Van Fleet and others, they actually sent about 250 officers in 1951, South Korean young officers, to be trained in Fort Moore and Fort Sill. So about 100 artillery officers were trained in Fort Sill, and 150 infantry officers were trained in Fort Moore, which is incredible because it's 1951. So Korean War is between 1952 and 1953, but still the U.S. military leadership saw a reason and a need to train young Korean officers. And this training in the U.S. kind of continued even after the war, and Fort Benning and Fort Sill remained as centers to train these young Korean officers. And many of them, went on to become not just great military leaders, but professor in major universities. And I think many of you know one officer who was trained in 1954. He later became a president of Korea. General Park Chung-hee was trained in Fort Sill in 1954. And it seems like there's a huge controversy in Korea right now as to what is the origin of the Korean Military Academy. So there is kind of ongoing ideological battle or controversy. But I feel like it is historically accurate to say it was General Van Fleet who really inspired and constructed a modern Korean Military Academy to be a 4-year institution in Jinhae during the Korean War. And he almost, invited and installed all the traditions that comes from the West Point, including square meal. I think if you went to West Point, you know what that means. It's very hard to do when you're dealing with Korean soup and rice, but I'm fortunate not to be part of a Korean Military Academy. But I think that tradition from the West Point and a lot of the education curriculum actually came from the United States and really transformed the Korean Military Academy as it is right now.
Yeah, I think if you have a chance to visit the Korean Military Academy, they recognize General Van Fleet's contribution there, statue, and I think that's really important. I think the other thing I think that we've talked about the fighting and the hardship. And the point you brought up is that, while all this is going on, two things were happening with the Korean military. Rebuilding a military, some being trained in Japan, some being trained in the United States, and then also the birth of the KATUSA program, the Korean augmentees to the U.S. Army. There's shortfalls in the U.S. military that we needed replacements, and so Korean soldiers were trained and then assigned to the U.S. Army. And so, these are things that really we don't talk much about. And really the complex building of militaries and sustaining them and training them is really it's really difficult. And doing it in wartime is really, really difficult. Building the proverbial airplane while in flight there. So General Donahoe and I have different experiences because we came to Korea much later than that. And so, arriving in the 80s, that's when you first arrived, and, really see the development of Korea, the legacy of these great gentlemen here and how the Miracle on the Han took place. And then, we came later and saw the fruits of the sacrifices that came before us. But I think, and especially Korean Defense Veterans Association, all of us who served in Korea but not in the Korean War, our experiences have been ongoing, and really the entire Korean Defense Veterans Association time of service after the Korean War has really helped to see how Korea has changed. And so you have multiple tours in Korea. So when you first arrived in Korea, what did you see in Korea that really struck you and that different than serving in Germany or in the States? If you could share that.
Yeah, thanks, David. This is actually the appropriate time to thank, Kevin Miller, right? So thanks, Kevin, for putting me between two verified war heroes and probably the smartest guy in the room. So really, thank you for that. Yeah. Norman, by the way, the Army is still trying to get accountability of the Jeep
I know.
and the soap and the candy. So appreciate that. So before I go into that, the really interesting point you brought up about Fort Sill, because my experience with Korea actually goes back to my father. My father was a field artillery officer training at Fort Sill in the summer of 1954, right? And so, I grew up hearing the story, and then he went to Korea, 55 to 56, and he spent 17 months there. And so I extended my tour as a lieutenant to be there longer than he was, right? So I had that point of dominance over my father at that point. But he used to share these recollections of all. By the way, and David, you kind of talked about this. The level of effort of the United States. We were training hundreds of South Korean officers. When you go into the Vietnam War, and you go back, and I had the privilege of being at Benning for multiple tours as well. I was an advisor in Afghanistan to an Afghan general who had trained at Fort Benning in 1971 to 73. And the photograph of his infantry officer advanced course that was graduating in 1972, there were 25 South Korean officers in that course. I'm sorry, South Vietnamese officers. Right? So when the United States doubled down on partners, you saw it manifest in our training programs. We can compare that to the level of effort we put into bringing Iraqis and Afghans here, which pales in comparison. But the whole story of my father in '54 training with the South Koreans, and then at Fort Sill, and going to South Korea, and he was a second lieutenant in an artillery battery just south of the Imjin River, and he has these vivid recollections of Korean officers at Fort Sill putting hot sauce in their milk. Right, and so that was one of the things that stuck with him, is that the food that they were serving at Fort Sill, all the Korean officers found to be really bland, so they had to do something to spice up the food. But it was, again, really fascinating for me then in 1989 to follow in my father's footsteps and go to Korea to really do the same thing, was helping preserve the peace on the peninsula, because he got there after the shooting had really stopped. although in the way he told that to my mother when they were dating was that when the Chinese and the North Koreans found out he was coming, they sued for peace. So I don't know if that's true. But it was, my ability to go and land, and I love this because I can say, yeah, when I was in Korea in the 80s, I landed in Korea December 28th of 1989. So I got like 4 days in the 80s, right? but that experience, I flew into Gimpo. Incheon was not a thing yet, right? So the same airport that my father had flown out to go to Japan on his way back in 1956 was the same airport I flew in and out of. And then, the Korea at that point was really just starting this journey, right? So you're at the front end of the Miracle on the Han. And Korea was still a very rural society. I mean, I was a tank platoon leader in Team Spirit 1990, and I had 4 M60A3s, the top of the line, right? I mean, I could fire that tank accurately at 5 miles an hour. If you went 6, you didn't know where the round was going, right? But I can remember pulling into a defensive position in Team Spirit, and we were putting the tanks in. It was a big rice paddy. It's in the early spring, and I hop off the tank and I walk like any dedicated platoon leader. I walk my tank platoon to make sure we're all sighted in, talk to each tank platoon leader or tank commander about what we were doing. And I get back to my tank, and this again is probably March 1990, and I hop back up on the tank, and I jump into the turret, and Sergeant Chuck Kennedy, who was my gunner, he was your stereotypical, Army tanker, this fire plug of a guy, turns around and just starts punching me in the leg and yelling at me to get out of the tank. And so, this field that I had just walked through was fertilized with night soil, right? And so I have pictures of my M60 tank with my proud, locally made Korean tanker boots strapped to the eyelet for the rest of the rotation, because you couldn't wear them anymore inside the tank, or Sergeant Kennedy would have killed me. But again, and then I had that opportunity to spend 1990 really and half of 91. Of course, we got stop-lost because of Desert Storm. But that was just a great formative experience in training and the understanding of responsibility, right? But then also this formative experience of we still had a ground defense plan, right? So you had a formal place where, when the horn sounded, you went to your GDP positions. Right? That's something our Army has lost since the end of the Cold War, right? And so, but in Korea in the mid-90s, you still had that, and you still had that whole process, and that was really beneficial for my professional development. And then, I got the other standard piece, which was all of a sudden you got this real change of job that you'd never been trained for. I became a tank battalion support platoon leader. And that's where I was really blessed, where I had a series of Katusas who could, help us. The minute we'd get, typical second lieutenant, right? We got lost every place I led us to, right? And so the Katusas were they were the folks who would get down and go, talk to the local folks and say, hey, kind of where are we? And then I would cross that with my map, and I go, what's the name of that place again, right? And really, really formative. And it also gave me the great opportunity to see much more of the country than I would have had I just stayed as a tank platoon leader, including taking 6 Hemmets into downtown Seoul in 1991, that's a whole nother story. Again, map reading is important. And so, it was just that whole process of coming into Korea at the end of the 80s and watching that. And then I had this opportunity to go back in 2003 and 4. I was the S3 of the only Armored Brigade combat team in CONUS that was not on the TIPFED, was not going to be deployed for the Iraq invasion. And so we got every other mission, which included the reinforcement of 2ID. And so we de facto became the 3rd Brigade of the 2nd Infantry Division. But we were in 1st Infantry Division at Fort Riley. And so if you think, right, 2nd Infantry Division, second to none, right? Well, in PowerPoint, you can break that up and remove the N. So on all of our slides, brief and general honore was second to one. We eventually got caught. The, fair enough. But I made 11 trips to Korea in 14 months as a Brigade S3. I was jet lagged for a year. But that was midway through, the real revolution of the Miracle on the Han. And then when I went back in 2018, everything had changed so dramatically. I was able to bring my family. We were at Camp Humphreys. We were the first family to live in our house that was built by, courtesy of about $10 billion of investment of the South Korean government and in the building of Camp Humphreys. And then those 2 years, I think, probably clearly some of the highlights of my time in uniform because of the warm reception of the Korean people, all of the friends we got to serve with there, and it really was formative in the development of my children as well because they got now to live for 2 years in Northeast Asia, travel extensively through Asia. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, I think I arrived in '86, and a couple things that tie back to the Korean War. Back then we didn't have the training areas, Rodriguez Range. We had Santa Barbara. I remember doing a division TOT on there with our mortars from the infantry and all the artillery. But we trained in a lot of the areas. Like Team Spirit area was just out in the out in the countryside. But up in the north, in the 2ID areas, we were out in the countryside. And one of the things I remember most vividly, being out in the field training, and in the same area for a couple days, and then all of a sudden, somebody reports finding a mortar round on the side of a road, or some kind of ordnance. And it turned out that the farmers would be finding this ordnance in their fields, in the rice paddies. And so they would pick it up and bring it to the side of the road because they knew the Americans, when we found it, that we would, of course, call EOD and properly dispose of it. But I think about them, first hitting it probably with their tractors, and then picking it up, and then bringing it to where we are going to take all the proper precautions. And, it's how they survive that, but it is the leftover unexploded ordnance from the war that persists to this day. And, of course, Korea wants to have, the Peace Park and the DMZ and everything. And, there's still 1 million landmines there. I don't know how we're ever going to clear that. The amount of ordnance is just really quite amazing. I'd like to shift to a couple things, and Mr. Board, you've already mentioned a couple names in your stories here, but I wonder if there's anyone that you really want to mention and to honor, somebody that really that you have a memory of that you'd like to share, because I think and you already shared the human element and how important that is. And is there anybody that you'd like to talk about and share with us from your memories?
Well, I would be amiss if I didn't call out the sergeant we had. His last name was Kidd, K-I-D-D. He was from Charleston, West Virginia. He had been in the Marines since '44, and he was a real Marine. He was tough. He was decisive. He knew explosives, and I was lucky to have him as a sergeant. And you never forget it. A kid like me, and that's what most of us were. We were mostly 18, 19 year old, and he was a seasoned veteran. Very, very decisive. And I often think about, we were panty waist Marines, and he was a real Marine. And I've looked him up on the wall of remembrance to see that his name was there, and thank the Lord it wasn't. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Mr. Lee, how about you? Do you have you'd like to?
I'd like to say about the General O.P. Smith. He was the commanding general of 1st Marine Division at Chosin. I was assigned to headquarters of Marine Division. I was able to observe him, and he also observed me. A ROC lieutenant, he assigned to a division headquarters. He was kind of curious at me, and he prays in the morning, and he prays before he sleep. He's a very religious person. He's dedicated not only to the God, but also needed to stay the Marine. He really believe a sort of a morality of general. When we were departing Incheon to Wonsan, we had to delay 2 hours for our departure because he went each the dead body of a Marine to pray for the Marine. And that delayed 2 hours entire. And I like to, the Army generals are really smart and good, but he's like the regular troop. When at the Hagaru, when we were serving hot cake, everybody wanted to have hot cake. He lined up back of me, back of troop, and for the second, he came back to the back of a troop to get the hot cake, and he really think of troops, and he's not only good with the strategy, but also he's a good human being to care the troops. And in my view, he's really not only the great fighter, but also great human beings. And in my view, that is a great general to respect. Thank you.
Thank you.
And, just to add to what the reporters had talked to General O.P. Smith, and they said, General, you are retreating to the rear. Now, whether he said this or not, it was reported he said, retreat, hell, we'll advance into the rear. So you never
It's
know.
in a new direction. In a new direction, right? Yeah. That's. I think the Marines are always have great public relations.
Yes.
They do the best.
Yes, they do. They've done a good. They did a good job on me in high school to get me to sign up along with several other the guys, and it was. And anyway, you look back. I look back over my entire life, 91 years, and I think, how could I have been so fortunate? Now, I'm not kidding. Fortunate to have joined the Marines and what it's meant to me. And yet I went through hell. I know that. And when I got released from Korea, it happened. The company runner come and got me and said, the captain wants to see you. The captain was never a very talkative guy. He was from Birmingham, Alabama. His name was Thurman. I remember that. And he said, Board, pack your stuff, you're going home. Well, I assumed that something had happened at home because he didn't tell me. And I didn't know that the real reason until I got to Kimpo. And Kimpo, they notified me that Margaret Chase Smith, the senator from Maine, had introduced a resolution in Congress that if you spent the first Christmas in Korea, you didn't have to spend the second. So here it is, December 2nd, or 3rd, or 4th, along about that day we're here, and I'm going home. Thank the Lord.
Wow, that is really. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's great. Did you go back to Korea?
I did not. I've had lots of opportunity, but I've had mixed emotions about doing that. I try to think about, did I have any time there that was an enjoyable time? And I can't remember that I put 2 days together. It was enjoyable. It was a drag the whole time, and I'm lucky to be here. I joined the Marines with three of my buddies. Four of us joined together. All three of them got wounded. I didn't get wounded. And I often look out and say, thank the Lord, the good Lord has looked after me all my life, and I don't really understand it. I'm 91. I have been fairly successful financially, and all I can do is look up and say, thank you, Lord.
If you had the opportunity to go back, would you?
Well, Kevin has offered me that. I think I've got to get my back better before I do anything. Yeah.
I just, in 1997, one of my professors, his father was in the West Point class in 1950, and he was in the 7th Infantry Division, landed at Incheon, fought to Yangdongpo, and then went around and landed at Wonsan. And he left in December of 50, was wounded, and he never went back. And so the Korean Veterans and Patriots Affairs, of course, invite veterans back, and he took the opportunity to visit Korea in 1997. And so my professor asked if I would meet him, and in addition to all the great tours that the Korean government provided to the veterans, I spent 2 days with him and showing him around. And the first thing I did was go to Namsan and go up in the tower there. And of course, his last, he made it to Yangdongpo and, the Norwegian fish market there, which Seoul was still north of Namsan. And it was just rice paddies. And so when he went up in the tower in Namsan and saw the changes to Seoul that had taken place, I mean, he really couldn't say anything. And I mention that because all the changes and the great things. South Korea is the 10th largest economy in the world. It is the global pivotal state, as President Yoon says. It's a partner in the arsenal of democracy, as we heard from Hanwha. It's really become a world power, but it's really because of your sacrifice, you and Mr. Lee and Seo's grandfather. What all of you did, was really to set the stage. And so I hope you get a chance to see it, because it is really because of you and your sacrifices and the sacrifices of your fellow Marines and soldiers. So thank you for that.
Well, I had tremendous admiration for the Korean people. To look at Korea today and look at Seoul when I was there, and you say, how could that have happened? How could that have happened? And now they're the 7th largest economy in the world. And we thank so many people for that. And now you look at the investment that Korean is making in this country. Go down to Savannah and look where we talk about electric cars and having maybe 3 hours use on it, or 30 hours. I have a Tesla. Their objective is to have a twice that. And you go up to Commerce and you look at the electric factory up there. You look what they're building in Savannah. You look what they have already got down at West Point and over in Alabama. It is absolutely amazing. And the question is, has there ever been a car company like it? And I don't think so.
Seo, I'd like to turn to you as a modern Korean soldier and your service in the Korean military. How has that shaped your successful career after your military service? What do you take from your military experience that has really helped you, both in Korea and here in the United States?
Sure. I would just like to start with the fact that I did apply to KTUSA and I did not get in, and modern conscription system and how well Koreans are educated, it is just tough to get in. And I later tried to get into Iraq, but I didn't get in that time. So Lebanon became my second choice. But that just shows that how many Koreans are really now engaged in this, international outreach, not just in commercial sectors, but in the military sectors. So, Korea joined the United Nations in 1991, along with DPRK. The reason why it joined so late was because communist states didn't want, South Korea to be part of the United Nations. But after that, they made, series of efforts to be really part of, international efforts. And I think it's partly due to the fact that international community led by the United States came to save Korea in 1950, and it really, stuck in Korea's mind that, they need to make, similar effort. So you see Korean soldiers in Lebanon, Haiti, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia, and other places, East Timor. And I think it is thanks to American intervention in the Korean War that really led to that movement. For me, I served between 2007 and 2009. So I was the first one to be enlisted in my family, which is kind of embarrassing. At the same, I take pride of the fact. It was 2 years of service, and I was fortunate enough to go to different country, Lebanon, and having educated in the United States for a certain extent, and going back to serve in Korea, and especially as a international affairs major, it was an important moment because you not only talk about what you're studying, but you actually be the part of international affairs and how nations get shaped. So me as a student, sophomore in college at the time, it really helped me, and in a way, I really cherish that memory of serving in both Daejeon and Lebanon. And I also like to add the fact that a lot of younger generations who actually study in the United States, for example, a lot of them really go through this competitive process to serve as interpreting officers. These are one of the brightest in Korea, and I remember one of my friends saying that I got into Ivy League, but I didn't get into interpreting officer course. So it just shows how many students who are studying in the United States that are really interested in working places like the CFC or working in different divisions where you have a lot of interactions with U.S. forces in Korea. So I think that's one of the few examples of the continuing legacy. And I also like to add the fact that one of the legacy of the Korean War, and one of the things that Korea really tried to carry on is the creation of the Ministry of National Defense Agency for Kia Recovery and Identification. So so there is an ongoing South Korean government effort to honor those who have fallen during the Korean War, both South Korean soldiers and American soldiers. So that is very active part of the Korean military that really tried to honor those who fell during the war. And I also like to mention the importance of the Vietnam War for Korean trans. As Colonel Maxwell introduced, my grandfather served in Vietnam between 1965 and 1967, and my great uncle from my mother's side also served in the Vietnam War. And a lot of people in international affairs sphere talk about the implication as to why South Korea was in Vietnam, geopolitical reasons. But I think there was a consensus among people that South Koreans really want to pay back what they received from the United States in the 1950s. And while we talk about different legacies of the Vietnam War, I think a lot of South Koreans, especially at the time, really welcome the idea that they can be in South Vietnam against communist aggression, and at the same time really pay back what they received during the Korean War.
Yeah, I think that many of us probably not aware, more than 2 divisions of South Korean soldiers fought in Vietnam, over 5,000 casualties, great sacrifice. And I just also want to just commend you. You are highlighting, my question, you're highlighting the competitiveness and the great soldiers in the Korean military, but you're really not emphasizing your own service and your willingness to serve. You volunteered for Iraq, volunteered for Lebanon. You you know, you exemplify what I think everybody in this room who have served, you know, you want to serve for your country, and yet, you know, you focus on others and how great, you know, those you were in competition with, you know, and how well they did. So I just commend you for that as well.
And also, can I just mention one thing? I just, you know, really want to highlight the sacrifices Korean soldiers made during the Korean War, because we talk about how, you know, fellow American soldiers who, you know, went to country they never knew, they never heard, but a lot of Korean soldiers at the time, very young soldiers were born in 1930s, so by late 1930s, Korea was still under Imperial, you know, Japan's colonial rule, and by late 1930s, they abolished ethnic-based education. So a lot of people, you know, in a way, didn't have a very strong sense of you being, you know, Korean. And the Republic of Korea was founded in 1948, August 15th, 1948. So you're talking about, you know, 18 or 19 years old who never actually had a concept of, you know, your own country making you know, great, you know, sacrifice. And I think that's really something. I don't know if I can do that if I was, you know, 18 or 19 years old. And, you know, and communism was a popular ideology. It was viewed by many, especially if you live in like Southern Korea, they didn't really have a good sense of, you know, whether, you know, how dangerous, you know, the communism or like Marxism as an ideology, you know, might be. So to, you know, join the South Korean military when, you know, there was a Busan perimeter, you know, is really remarkable. And Daegu, one of the few cities that didn't, you know, fall under the North Korean rule, it used to be called the Korea's Moscow, because there was active, you know, communist movement, and it was Pyongyang that was actually called Korea's Jerusalem, because there are a lot of Christians living in Pyongyang. So if you kind of, you know, think of that, you know, it's very interesting.
All right, I couldn't stop asking questions of these gentlemen, but let me open up the floor to those who'd like to ask some questions. I can keep asking questions. That's, but some of you must have something you'd like to hear from these gentlemen.
This question is for General Donahoe. Sir, so I think there are some Koreans that continue to train at Fort Moore. So when you were the commander there at the Maneuver Excellence Center of Excellence, so did you notice any difference between the Korean soldiers that came through there versus other nations? Just curious.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Actually, I was gonna talk to one of Sam's points earlier, right? You know, you talked about your father training at Fort Benning in 1987.
Yes, sir.
Right, and he's married, but doesn't bring his wife.
No.
Right, so if you, and this speaks to the wealth of the South Korean nation today. You go down to Fort Moore right now. I think we have 3 captains out of the ROK Army in the Maneuver Captain Career Course. If they're married, they bring their spouse, and that's on their own dime. They've got to fly the spouse here, and they've got to go downtown and, you know, get a house, because the U.S. only gives them single officer quarters. And so again, it speaks to this miracle on the Han that we've seen, right? And that's just in one generation, right? The other amazing part about it is when you talk to the South Korean officers who are training at Fort Moore, they'll see more of the United States than most Americans will, just in their, you know, 8 months going through the captain's career course. I mean, I sponsored you know, a young captain and his wife last year as they were coming through the course, and you know, every long weekend they were, you know, they first long weekend they were here, they flew to Vegas, right, and then drove from Vegas to L.A. and then came back. They went. Every one of them will go to Disney World, right, or Disneyland, one of the two. The South Koreans that come really take advantage of the opportunity, and so you have that part of it. The other side of it is they are determined professionals, right? So they come. You're never going to have a problem with your ROK officer doing something stupid on the weekend or not being prepared for class, right? They're they're going to do the reading, they're going to work through the tactical problem, and they're going to come into the classroom ready and willing to participate. I mean, they serve as role models to not only the international students that are there, but also to the American students to keep up with them.
Yeah, I found that most all-Korean officers know U.S. military doctrine better than U.S. military officers. I've experienced that many times. Other questions? Yes. Microphone.
Mr. Lee, most of us in this room have spent our life reading about people that you had a catbird seat in a unique place in history to observe. You talked about General Smith. Do you have any other observations from any other of the command group on that ship before that invasion that you could share with us? Because I find it fascinating.
Yes, to you.
I have a problem with hearing.
Oh, okay. So, yes, you need to use the microphone there. So, you shared a great story about O.P. Smith.
Yes.
And do you have any other leaders, the ships you were on, or other military leaders that you would like to share a story about, to give some insights? Because you were there, and you know, no one else can really tell those stories. So,
I want to talk about the other Army generals, particularly like General Stilwell in the, I guess, post-Korean War time. They, I think the U.S. Forces in Korea, the commanding generals, most of them determined. They thought they are deterring communist expansion. When they served 4 years or 2 years in Korea, they were so satisfied. I did my job. I served. I deterred communist expansion 2 years. That's a tradition I have observed. Most of the commanding general of U.S. forces in Korea, I admire them. They were the one really stopped the communist expansion, not only in Korea, but in the world. And they're determined. They dedicated their life. For that, I really admire them. They really served the country, not only Korea, but also U.S., and we are here because of them. I don't think I answered your question, but at least I said what I think of it.
great question and great answer. Thank you. Go ahead.
I would like to identify Captain, he was a colonel then, Lieutenant Colonel Ray Davis, who saved Fox Company and led a group of Marines not down a path, but across the mountains and attacked the Chinese and saved Fox Company. He got the Medal of Honor for that and later became a 4-star general. So there was a lot of it.
He's from Georgia, near here.
He grew up down in Fitzgerald. Well, a neighbor of mine knew his family well, so my next door neighbor. So anyway,
He's not like a regular Marine. He's a quiet gentleman, never expressed his emotion. But he's very effective. I was able to serve under him for a while in Joseon. But he is really not only a great gentleman, but also very effective, really effective. He's just very courageous. He's from Georgia. I guess he's buried here.
I don't know. All right. Well, I think, are there any other questions, anybody? Well, I think we're coming up on time here, and I'd just like to say, and I think you'll all agree that, it is a rare opportunity to hear such stories from all 4 gentlemen here that have shared tremendous insights from their experiences and their fathers' and grandfathers' experiences. And I think that, it's most important to hear the human element, and that's what we really heard today, the humanity among soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen, everybody who serves I think it's incredible to hear these kind of stories. I'd also like to say that I think these gentlemen here are exactly why KDVA exists, so that we can keep this legacy alive, honor those who've sacrificed and have made a difference, and to continue that legacy. And especially, between our two great nations, it is really a unique alliance. It is, we have ironclad, cornerstone, all kinds of alliances. We use all those superlatives. But I think, the Rock-U.S. Alliance is forged in blood. We've seen that here. And it carries on to this day. All of us who've served, I think one of the things that, comes out in this are the personal relationships that we develop with our service, with our American and Korean brothers and sisters. It carries on to this day. And so I just like to thank KDVA for continuing to make this possible. And I'd just like to thank these four gentlemen for really sharing their incredible stories. Thank you.
I'd like to just close by what one of our governors, Zell Miller, said, and I feel the same way. All I needed to know in life, I learned in the Marines.
Here, here. All right. Thank you.
If you gentlemen would stay fast just a second, I'm going to do this. I've been sneaking these in on the side, but just so you know what I'm doing here, for each one of these gentlemen, we're going to give them one of our coins as a token of appreciation for what they've done. But the second one is, I've not given out prior to this, we have a partnership with the Non-Commissioned Officers Association, NCOA. And so for the two gentlemen that are Korean War veterans, they've allowed us to present one of their medals, which are quite nice, on their behalf as well. And that's what I'm going to do here quietly. You can drive on, but I wanted you to know what we were giving them, so thank you. Thank you.
Sir.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I've got three quick things. So first of all, our great partner, the 2nd Indian Head Division, they've got a memorial that Ben talked about. So if you would like more information about it, and memorial in Washington, D.C., pamphlets are outside. Secondly, did anyone drop a lottery ticket? It's a parking valet pass. If you dropped it, please come and see Earlene in the back. And just in case, so just check to make sure you have your valet ticket for parking here, okay? All righty. So the next panel will start at 3:15. Please take a short break. What did I ask y'all to do? Please meet 5 people that you did not know before today. Make sure you meet 5 new people. And then the panel, I'd like to have you on the stage at 3:10, please, ready to go. 3:10.